The scream tore through the October night like a jagged knife, and Beatrice Dawson knew immediately that Sarah Miller's baby was coming early, too early, and there would be no time to fetch Dr. Reynolds from 3 towns over. Beatrice had been preparing her evening tea in the small cabin she rented on the edge of Gila City, Arizona Territory, when she heard that first terrible cry. Her hands had stilled on the kettle, every muscle in her body tensing with recognition. She had been a midwife for 6 years now, ever since she turned 18 and apprenticed with old Mrs. Thornton back in St. Louis. She knew the sound of a woman in hard labor, and she knew the particular edge of panic in Sarah Miller's voice meant something was very wrong. Without hesitation, Beatrice grabbed her leather medical bag, the one her mother had given her before consumption took her life 2 winters past. She threw a shawl over her shoulders against the desert cold and rushed out into the darkness. The Miller homestead sat a quarter-mile from her cabin, close enough to be neighborly, but far enough to provide privacy. As Beatrice ran across the scrubland, her boots crunching on dry earth and scattered mesquite, she could see lamplight blazing in every window of the Miller house. She burst through the door without knocking. Sarah Miller lay on the bed in the back room, her face pale as moonlight, her nightgown soaked through with sweat and blood. Too much blood. Beatrice's heart lurched, but she forced her expression to remain calm. A midwife could not afford to show fear. "Where is your husband?" Beatrice asked, moving swiftly to Sarah's side and opening her medical bag. "Tucson," Sarah gasped between contractions. "He went to sell cattle, not due back until next week. The baby is early, too early." Beatrice pressed her hand to Sarah's swollen belly, feeling the tight contractions. 6 weeks early by her estimation, maybe 7. "How long have you been laboring?" "Since midday. I thought it was false pains at first, but they kept getting worse." Sarah's hand shot out and gripped Beatrice's wrist with surprising strength. "Something is wrong. I can feel it." Beatrice examined her patient with gentle efficiency, her mind racing through everything Mrs. Thornton had taught her. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The baby was breech, positioned completely wrong for birth. If Beatrice could not turn the infant, both mother and child would die. "Sarah, listen to me," Beatrice said, keeping her voice steady. "Your baby is sitting wrong. I need to try to turn the child, or neither of you will survive this night. It will hurt, but I need you to trust me." Sarah's eyes, wide with terror, fixed on Beatrice's face. Then she nodded. "Do what you must." Beatrice had just begun the delicate process of attempting to manipulate the baby's position from outside Sarah's belly when she heard the sound of boots on the wooden porch. Heavy, masculine steps. Her pulse quickened with hope. Perhaps Mr. Miller had returned early, or one of the ranch hands from the neighboring spread had heard Sarah's cries. The door opened, and Beatrice glanced up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the night. She recognized him instantly, even in the lamplight's uncertain glow. Clayton Adams, the cowboy who had bought the abandoned ranch adjoining the Miller property 3 months ago. Beatrice had seen him a handful of times in town, always polite when their paths crossed, always respectful in a way that was becoming rare in the rough territory. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes, she recalled, were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds gathering over distant mountains. "I heard screaming," Clayton said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. He lived alone on his ranch, Beatrice knew, with no family and few friends. "Is she hurt? Can I help?" Beatrice made a split-second decision. "Close the door and stay. I need someone here in case there are complications." Clayton hesitated only a moment before stepping fully inside and shutting the door behind him. He removed his hat, revealing that dark hair pressed flat against his head. What do you need me to do? Right now, stand guard. Make sure no animals or drifters disturb us. This is going to be a long night and I cannot be distracted. Beatrice turned back to Sarah, who was panting through another contraction. Boil water in the kitchen. Lots of it. Bring clean cloths if you can find them. Clayton moved with surprising efficiency for such a large man. Beatrice heard him working in the kitchen, the clank of pots, the pump of the water handle. She focused all her attention on the task before her hands pressing firmly but carefully against Sarah's abdomen, trying to coax the stubborn infant to turn. Mrs. Thornton had always said this was more art than science, a matter of feel and instinct and prayer. Sarah screamed again, and Beatrice felt the baby shift slightly. "Good," she murmured. "That's good, Sarah. Stay with me." "I cannot do this," Sarah sobbed. "It hurts too much. Let me rest." "You can rest when your baby is born healthy and crying." Beatrice's voice was firm but not unkind. "Until then, you fight. Do you hear me? You fight for this child." Clayton appeared in the doorway with a pot of steaming water and an armload of clean linens. His gray eyes met Beatrice's for just a moment, and she saw something there that surprised her. Respect, certainly, but also something deeper. Concern, perhaps, or admiration for what she was attempting. "Set them beside the bed," Beatrice instructed. "Then go back outside. Watch the perimeter of the house. Wolves have been spotted in the area, and we cannot afford any surprises tonight." Clayton nodded and did as she asked. Beatrice heard the door close behind him, and then she was alone with Sarah and the daunting task before her. She worked for what felt like hours, though the old clock on the mantel suggested it had been only 40 minutes. Her hands ached, her back screamed in protest from bending over the bed, but still she persisted. Finally, blessedly, she felt the baby turn. Not completely, not into the ideal position, but enough that she thought a safe delivery might be possible. "Sarah, your baby has moved. When the next contraction comes, I need you to push with everything you have. Can you do that?" Sarah's face was gray with exhaustion, her lips cracked and bleeding where she had bitten them, but she nodded. "Tell me when." Beatrice waited, her hand on Sarah's belly, feeling for the telltale tightening. When it came, she commanded, "Now, push, Sarah." The night descended into a blur of blood and sweat and screaming. Beatrice lost track of time, lost track of everything except the desperate need to bring this child safely into the world. She was vaguely aware of Clayton outside, of his silhouette passing by the window at regular intervals as he made his rounds. Once, she heard him shout something, followed by the crack of his rifle. Later, she would learn he had scared off a pack of coyotes drawn by the smell of blood. But in the moment, all Beatrice could focus on was the impossible task before her. Sarah was weakening, her pushes growing feeble. The baby was stuck, not quite breech anymore, but not positioned correctly either. Beatrice made a decision that would haunt her if it went wrong. She reached inside, her hand finding the baby's shoulders, and she pulled. Gently at first, then with more force as another contraction seized Sarah's body. "Push," Beatrice shouted. "Push now, Sarah," and then, in a rush of blood and fluid, the baby came free. A girl, tiny and blue-tinged, not breathing. Beatrice's heart stopped. She had seen this before, had lost babies born too early or too damaged by difficult births. But she refused to accept it. Not tonight, not after everything. She cleared the infant's mouth and nose with her finger, then turned the baby upside down and struck her back with firm, controlled pats. Nothing. She did it again, harder this time, desperation clawing at her throat. "Breathe," she whispered. "Breathe, little one." And then, as if in answer to a prayer Beatrice had not realized she was uttering, the baby gasped. A thin, ready cry escaped the infant's lips, growing stronger with each breath. Beatrice felt tears streaming down her face as she wrapped the child in clean linen and placed her on Sarah's chest. "You have a daughter," Beatrice said, her voice shaking with relief and exhaustion. "A fighter just like her mother." Sarah wept, cradling the tiny infant against her skin. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, Beatrice, you saved us both." Beatrice still had work to do. She delivered the afterbirth, checked Sarah for tears that might need stitching, cleaned both mother and child as best she could. The sky was beginning to lighten outside the window, pale pink fingers of dawn stretching across the desert, before Beatrice finally allowed herself to step back and assess her work. Mother and baby were both alive, both breathing steadily. Sarah had fallen into an exhausted sleep, the infant tucked safely in the crook of her arm. Beatrice covered them both with a clean quilt, then picked up her blood-soaked bag and made her way to the kitchen. Clayton was standing by the stove, heating coffee in a dented pot. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and Beatrice saw the question in his eyes before he spoke it. "They are both alive," she said simply. "A girl, small, but I believe she will thrive if we can keep her warm and get milk into her." Clayton's shoulders sagged with relief. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Beatrice. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "I have seen men face down armed outlaws with less courage than you showed tonight." Beatrice took the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm cup. She was only now beginning to feel the exhaustion that dragged at her bones, the trembling in her limbs from hours of sustained effort. "I only did what needed doing." "No," Clayton's voice was firm. "You did something extraordinary. That woman and her child would be dead if not for your skill and determination." Beatrice looked at him properly for the first time since the ordeal began, really looked at him. In the growing daylight, she could see the lines of exhaustion on his face, the rifle still clutched in one hand, the holster on his hip. "You stood watch all night." "I did." He took a sip of his coffee. "Saw off some coyotes around midnight. Couple of drifters came sniffing around near dawn. I sent them on their way with a warning. You protected us." The realization settled over Beatrice like a warm blanket. This man, this near stranger, had given up his entire night to ensure her safety and the safety of her patients. Why? Clayton was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because watching you work through that window, seeing your determination even when things looked hopeless, it reminded me that there is still good in this hard world. I wanted to protect that goodness. I wanted to protect you." Something shifted in Beatrice's chest, a feeling she could not quite name. She had been courted before, back in St. Louis, by respectable men with steady incomes and good prospects. But none of them had ever looked at her the way Clayton Adams was looking at her now, with a mixture of awe and admiration and something deeper that made her breath catch in her throat. "I should go home," she said, though she made no move toward the door. "Get cleaned up. I will come back this afternoon to check on Sarah and the baby." "Let me walk you," Clayton offered. "The sun is barely up. It is not safe for a woman alone." Beatrice wanted to protest that she had walked this path alone dozens of times, that she was perfectly capable of defending herself. But the truth was, she was so exhausted she could barely stand upright, and the thought of Clayton's solid presence beside her was more appealing than she wanted to admit. They walked in comfortable silence across the scrubland, the morning air crisp and clean after the blood and sweat of the night. Birds were beginning to sing in the mesquite bushes, and somewhere in the distance, Beatrice heard the lowing of cattle. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, after a night that had been anything but ordinary. When they reached her cabin, Clayton hesitated on the porch. "Miss Dawson, I know this might not be the right time, but I was wondering if I might call on you sometime. Properly, I mean, with flowers and an invitation to dinner. Beatrice felt a smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. "I would like that very much, Mr. Adams." "Clayton," he said softly. "Please call me Clayton. Then you must call me Beatrice." She met his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had watched over her all night, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Thank you for what you did tonight, for staying, for protecting us. It was my honor." Clayton tipped his hat to her, a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and endearing. "Get some rest, Beatrice. You earned it." Beatrice watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him back toward his ranch. Then she went inside, stripped off her blood-stained dress, and fell into bed without bothering to wash. She was asleep before her head fully settled on the pillow. She woke to knocking on her door, disoriented and groggy. The light slanting through her window suggested it was mid-afternoon. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, and Beatrice forced herself out of bed. She wrapped a robe over her nightgown and opened the door to find Clayton standing on her porch, his hat in his hands. "I am sorry to disturb you," he said quickly, "but I thought you would want to know. I checked on Mrs. Miller an hour ago. She and the baby are both doing well. She is awake and nursing the little one. I brought her some soup and bread." Beatrice blinked, still half asleep. "You checked on them? You brought food?" Clayton looked almost embarrassed. "Well, I figured she would need help with her husband away and you needing rest. It was not any trouble." Something in Beatrice's chest squeezed tight. This man, this rough cowboy who lived alone and spoke little, had spent the night guarding them and now was caring for her patient so Beatrice could rest. "That was very kind of you." "It was practical," Clayton corrected, though his eyes were warm. "But I also wanted an excuse to check on you. To make sure you were all right after everything." "I am fine." Beatrice became suddenly aware that she was standing in her doorway in nothing but a nightgown and robe, her hair a tangled mess around her shoulders. "I should get dressed. I need to examine Sarah and the baby properly." "Of course." Clayton started to turn away, then paused. "Beatrice, that dinner invitation I mentioned, would tomorrow evening be too soon? I could cook, or we could go into town if you prefer." Beatrice found herself nodding before she had fully thought it through. "Tomorrow would be lovely, but let me cook. Come here at 6, and I will make something decent for us both." The smile that spread across Clayton's face transformed him. It softened the hard lines weathered into his features, made him look younger, almost boyish. "I will count the hours," he said, and then he was gone, striding back across the scrubland toward his ranch. Beatrice closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. What was she doing? She barely knew this man, but even as the thought formed, she knew it was not entirely true. She had seen him at his core last night, had seen the kind of man he was when tested. That was worth more than months of polite courtship and careful conversation. She dressed quickly and walked to the Miller homestead. Sarah was indeed awake and nursing the baby, who looked pink and healthy despite her dramatic entrance into the world. Beatrice examined them both thoroughly and was pleased with what she found. "You are healing well," she told Sarah, "and your daughter is stronger than she looks. Keep her warm, keep nursing her, and I believe she will thrive." "Mr. Adams was here earlier," Sarah said, a knowing glint in her eye. "He said you worked through the whole night to save us. He also said he has never seen anyone braver or more skilled." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Adams is too generous with his praise." "I do not think so." Sarah adjusted the baby in her arms. "And I saw the way he looked at you when you arrived this afternoon, like you hung the moon and stars." "You are imagining things," Beatrice protested, but her smile betrayed her. She returned to her cabin and spent the rest of the day in a daze, part exhaustion and part anticipation. That night, She lay in bed replaying every moment of the previous evening, every word Clayton had spoken, every glance they had shared. She had come to Arizona territory to escape the suffocating expectations of St. Louis society, to practice her profession without the constant judgment of people who thought midwifery was beneath a respectable woman. She had not been looking for romance, had not expected to find it in this harsh desert landscape. But now, with Clayton's gray eyes haunting her thoughts and the memory of his steady presence warming her from the inside out, Beatrice wondered if perhaps she had found something she had not known she was seeking. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Beatrice checked on Sarah and the baby again in the morning, pleased to see both continuing to improve. She spent the afternoon cooking, preparing a beef stew with vegetables she had bought in town and biscuits that she hoped would turn out light and fluffy. She changed her dress 3 times, finally settling on a simple blue cotton that she knew brought out her eyes. Clayton arrived exactly at 6, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like he had picked them himself from the desert. Beatrice found this infinitely more charming than any expensive hothouse roses could have been. "These are beautiful," she said, taking the flowers and putting them in a mason jar with water. "Thank you." "They are not much," Clayton admitted, "but I wanted to bring you something." They sat down to dinner, and for the first few minutes, conversation was stilted and awkward. But then Clayton asked about her training as a midwife, and Beatrice found herself talking freely about Mrs. Thornton, about the dozens of births she had attended, about her mother's death and her decision to come west. "I wanted to go where I was needed," she explained, "where I could make a real difference. There are plenty of midwives in St. Louis, but out here, women die in childbirth all the time because there is no one to help them. I thought I could change that, at least for a few people." "You did change it," Clayton said quietly. "You changed everything for Sarah Miller and her daughter. For her husband, who will come home to find his family alive instead of dead. You matter, Beatrice. What you do matters." No one had ever put it quite like that before. Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Clayton reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip warm and strong. "Tell me to stop if this is too forward," he said. "But I need you to know something. I came to Arizona running from my past, from mistakes I made and people I lost. I bought that ranch thinking I would live out my days alone, working hard and keeping my head down. But then I met you and everything changed." Beatrice's heart was thundering in her chest. "Clayton, let me finish," he said gently. "The night of the birth, watching you fight so hard to save them, seeing your courage and your skill, it woke something in me that I thought was dead. Hope, maybe. The belief that I could have something good in my life again. I know it is too soon to say this. I know we barely know each other. But I am falling in love with you, Beatrice Dawson, and I needed you to know." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and risk. Beatrice could feel the magnitude of this moment, understood that what she said next would shape both their futures. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, her voice steady despite the wild beating of her heart. "It terrifies me. I have built a life here on my own, made myself independent. But when I think about you, when I remember how you stood guard all night to keep us safe, I think maybe independence is not the same as happiness." Clayton stood and moved around the table, pulling Beatrice to her feet. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. "I will never try to take your independence from you," he promised. "Your work is important. You are important. I want to stand beside you, not in front of you. Can you believe that?" "Yes," Beatrice breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and tasting of the coffee they had shared. She melted into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady thunder of his heartbeat beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "I have never felt this way before," he confessed. "Never wanted anything as much as I want a future with you." "We barely know each other," Beatrice protested weakly, even as every fiber of her being was crying out that this was right, that this was meant to be. "Then let's change that." Clayton stepped back, though he kept hold of her hands. "Court me properly, Beatrice. Let me court you. We will take our time, do this right. But know that my intentions are serious. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you, and I am willing to wait as long as it takes for you to want the same thing." Beatrice looked up into those storm-gray eyes and saw her future written there. Saw decades of shared meals and quiet evenings. Saw herself growing round with child while Clayton hovered protectively nearby. Saw laughter and arguments, and the deep contentment of a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. "I do not think you will have to wait very long," she said softly, and was rewarded with another of those transformative smiles. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. Clayton told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to illness when he was 21, about the failed ranch he had tried to run with his older brother until drought and debt had forced them to sell. His brother had gone east to try his hand at business, but Clayton had drifted west, working as a ranch hand and saving every penny until he could buy his own land. "I wanted to prove I could do it," he explained, "that I was not a failure, that I could build something lasting." "You are not a failure," Beatrice said firmly. "You are one of the strongest, most honorable men I have ever met." Clayton left reluctantly when the clock struck 9, kissing Beatrice once more on her porch before heading back to his ranch. She watched him disappear into the darkness, already counting the hours until she would see him again. Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern. Clayton would visit Beatrice most evenings, sometimes bringing fresh meat from his herd, other times just his company and conversation. On Sundays, they would attend church together in Gila City, enduring the speculative looks and whispered conversations of the townspeople with good-natured humor. Beatrice continued her work as a midwife, and Clayton was always there when she needed him, ready to stand guard or fetch supplies or simply provide a steady presence. He was there when she delivered the Walker twins, a difficult birth that left Beatrice drained and shaking. Clayton held her afterwards, let her cry out her exhaustion and fear into his shoulder, never once suggesting she should give up her calling. He was there when she attended to a young mother who did not survive childbirth, despite Beatrice's best efforts. Clayton sat with her through the night as she grieved, as she questioned whether she was doing any good at all. He reminded her of Sarah Miller, of the dozens of other women and babies she had saved, and slowly Beatrice found her equilibrium again. And she was there for him too. When a late summer storm destroyed part of his barn, Beatrice spent 3 days helping him rebuild, her hands blistering from unfamiliar work, but her spirit soaring at the partnership they were forging. When one of his cattle took sick, and he had to put it down, she held him while he mourned the loss, understanding that each animal represented not just money but his dreams for the future. 3 months after that fateful night when Beatrice delivered Sarah Miller's baby, Clayton took her on a picnic to a beautiful spot overlooking a canyon. The Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Beatrice thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. "I have something to ask you," Clayton said, taking both her hands in his, "and I need you to be honest with me even if the answer is no." Beatrice's heart began to race. "All right." Clayton dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. Beatrice Dawson, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be a better man. I love your courage, your compassion, your stubborn refusal to give up even when things seem impossible. I love the way you wrinkle your nose when you are thinking hard about something, and the way you hum while you cook, and the way you look at me like I am the only man in the world. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life standing beside you, supporting your work, building a future together? Tears were streaming down Beatrice's face, but she was smiling. Yes, she said. Yes, Clayton, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, pulling her close, and Beatrice felt like she was flying, like she was falling, like she was finally home. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the church in Gila City. Sarah Miller was there, her daughter Emma now 4 months old and thriving. Half the town turned out to witness the union of the dedicated midwife and the quiet cowboy. And if there were a few grumbles about how quickly they were moving, these were drowned out by the genuine happiness on the couple's faces. Beatrice moved into Clayton's ranch house, and they spent their first weeks of marriage getting to know each other in this new, intimate way. Beatrice continued her work as a midwife, and Clayton supported her completely. He would ride with her when she had to travel to distant homesteads, would wait patiently while she attended births, would help carry her supplies and boil water and do whatever else needed doing. "We are a team," he told her one night as they lay in bed, Beatrice's head on his chest, his fingers running through her unbound hair. "Your work is our work. Your calling is our calling. I am so proud to be your husband." Beatrice tilted her head up to kiss him. "I never thought I could have this," she confessed. "A career and a marriage, independence and partnership, but you have given me both. You have given me everything." Life was not always easy. The Arizona territory was harsh, and they faced challenges that tested them both. A drought in their first year of marriage decimated Clayton's herd, and they had to take out a loan to buy new cattle. Beatrice lost 2 mothers in childbirth within a month of each other, and the grief nearly broke her. But they faced each challenge together, supporting each other, never letting hardship drive a wedge between them, and there were so many beautiful moments too. Their first Christmas as a married couple spent decorating a scraggly pine tree Clayton had hauled in from the mountains. The day Clayton surprised Beatrice with a new medical bag, proper and professional, ordered all the way from San Francisco. The evening they sat on their porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the desert, neither speaking, just holding hands and marveling at the raw beauty of their home. 2 years into their marriage, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had delivered dozens of babies by this point, had counseled countless women through their pregnancies, but when it was her own body changing, her own child growing inside her, everything felt different. Terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, Clayton was beside himself with joy and anxiety. He hovered over Beatrice constantly, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, fussing over her diet and rest. It would have been annoying if it had not been so endearing. "I am a midwife," Beatrice reminded him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from attending a birth. "I know what I am doing. I know my limits." "I know you do," Clayton said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "But you are my wife. You are carrying my child. The thought of anything happening to you terrifies me." Beatrice took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "I am strong, Clayton. You know I am. And I will not stop working just because I am pregnant. But I promise I will be careful. I promise I will ask for help if I need it." "Can that be enough?" Clayton closed his eyes and nodded. "It has to be. I am sorry. I do not mean to smother you. I just love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Beatrice whispered, and kissed him until the fear faded from his eyes. She worked through most of her pregnancy, finally stopping only in the last month when her belly was so large she could barely walk. True to her word, she had been careful, had not taken any unnecessary risks. Clayton had been there for every birth in the last months, standing guard as he had that first night, and Beatrice found his presence comforting rather than stifling. When her own time came, Beatrice was as prepared as any midwife could be for her own childbirth. She had arranged for Mrs. Chen, another midwife who had recently moved to the area to attend her. Clayton was there too, holding her hand, wiping her brow, looking pale but determined. "I have seen calves born," he said when Beatrice asked if he was sure he wanted to stay. "I know it is not pretty. But I stood guard that first night we met, and I will stand with you now, if you want me here." "I want you here," Beatrice gasped between contractions. "I need you here." The labor was long and difficult, testing Beatrice's strength in ways she had not anticipated. But she had Clayton's hand to hold, his voice in her ear telling her she was strong, she was brave, she could do this. And finally, after hours of struggle, their son was born, perfect and pink and wailing his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, placing the infant on Beatrice's chest. "Strong and healthy." Beatrice looked down at her son, at his tiny fists and scrunched face, and felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. Then she looked up at Clayton, saw tears streaming down his face, and fell in love with him all over again. "We made this," Clayton said wonderingly, reaching out to touch the baby's downy head with one tentative finger. "We made a whole person. We did." Beatrice was crying too, overwhelmed with joy and relief and bone-deep exhaustion. What should we name him? They had discussed names endlessly over the past months but had never quite decided on one. Now, looking at their son, Clayton said, "Matthew. It means gift of God." "Because that is what he is. What you both are. Gifts I never thought I deserved." "Matthew Adams," Beatrice said, trying it out. "Yes, it is perfect." Their son thrived, growing from a red-faced infant into a chubby, cheerful baby who rarely cried and smiled at everyone. Beatrice had worried about balancing motherhood with her work, but Clayton made it possible. On days when she was called out to a birth, he would care for Matthew with a tenderness that made her fall in love with him anew each time she witnessed it. "You are a natural father," she told him one evening, watching as he rocked Matthew to sleep. "I am trying," Clayton said quietly. "I want to be the kind of father my own dad was, patient and kind and always there when needed." "You are exactly that kind of father," Beatrice assured him. Life settled into a new rhythm. Days filled with the demands of ranch work and midwifery and parenting, nights spent exhausted but content in each other's arms. They had arguments, of course, times when the stress of too much work and too little sleep frayed their tempers. But they had learned how to fight fair, how to listen to each other, how to apologize and forgive. When Matthew was 2, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time, Clayton was better prepared, less hovering and more supportive. Their daughter was born on a cool November night, her arrival much easier than her brother's had been. They named her Grace because that was what she represented, the grace of a second chance, of happiness that endured, of a life built on love. The years passed in a blur of precious moments and hard work. Matthew grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved helping his father with the cattle. Grace was wild and fearless, more likely to be found climbing trees than playing with dolls. Beatrice's reputation as a skilled midwife spread throughout the territory, and she was called to births as far as 50 miles away. Clayton's ranch prospered, his careful management and hard work paying off in healthy herds and steady income. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Clayton surprised Beatrice with a trip to Tucson, their first time away from the ranch and children together since Matthew's birth. They stayed in a hotel, attended the theater, walked through the bustling streets hand in hand like newlyweds. "I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Beatrice said as they stood on the hotel balcony watching the sunset. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you showed up at Sarah Miller's door. Other times it feels like we have been together forever." Clayton wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Do you have any regrets? About leaving your old life behind, about marrying a cowboy, about the hardships we have faced?" Beatrice turned in his arms to face him. "Not a single one. You are my great adventure, Clayton Adams. My greatest love. Everything we have built together, everything we have faced, it has all been worth it because I got to do it with you." "I love you," Clayton said, and kissed her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding night, on the night of their first kiss, on 1,000 nights between then and now. "I love you too," Beatrice whispered against his lips. "Always and forever." They returned home to find their children had driven poor Mrs. Chen, who had been watching them, to distraction with their energy and mischief. But even the chaos of homecoming could not diminish the renewed connection Beatrice and Clayton had found in Tucson. They had been reminded that they were not just parents and working partners, but husband and wife, lovers, best friends. More years passed. Matthew turned 16 and began talking about becoming a doctor, inspired by his mother's work. Grace, at 14, announced she wanted to raise horses. Clayton's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines deepened around Beatrice's eyes, but to each other they remained as beautiful as they had been on that first night. They faced tragedies too. Clayton's brother died of cholera in Kansas City, a loss that hit Clayton hard despite years of infrequent contact. Beatrice lost a young mother and baby in childbirth, despite her best efforts, and the grief nearly sent her back to the dark place she had been after those earlier losses. But they pulled each other through, as they always had, as they always would. On a summer evening when Beatrice was 42 and Clayton was 45, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were grown now, Matthew away at medical school in Philadelphia, Grace helping manage the ranch and starting to breed her horses. The house felt too quiet sometimes without the chaos of childhood, but there was also a sweetness to this new phase of their lives. "Do you remember the night we met?" Clayton asked, reaching over to take Beatrice's hand. "Every detail," Beatrice said. "The terror I felt when I saw that baby was breech, the relief when you showed up and I was not alone. The way you looked at me in the morning light like I was something precious." "You are precious," Clayton said simply. "You always have been. That night, watching you fight so hard to save them, I knew my life would never be the same, and I was right. You gave me everything, Beatrice. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a reason to be better than I thought I could be." Beatrice squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that had never failed her. "You gave me just as much. Before I met you, I thought I had to choose between my work and a family, between independence and love. But you showed me I could have both. You stood beside me, never tried to make me smaller, never resented the time I gave to others. You made me believe in partnership." "We are a good team," Clayton agreed, then grinned. "Even if you are bossy sometimes." Beatrice laughed and swatted at him playfully. "Someone has to keep you organized. Left to your own devices, you would never remember to eat lunch." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and one of Clayton's cattle lowed in response. The sounds of the desert, the sounds of home. "I have been thinking," Clayton said after a while. Matthew will be finishing medical school in 2 years. What if we convinced him to come back here? Set up a practice. Then you two could work together and maybe you could start taking on some easier cases, not traveling as far. Beatrice considered this. She was not getting any younger, and some of the harder births were beginning to tax her strength in ways they had not before. I would like that, she admitted. I want to keep working, but having Matthew here to handle the more complicated deliveries would be a blessing. And it would be good to have him home, Clayton added. I miss that boy, miss both our children. Grace is still here, Beatrice pointed out, true. But she is so busy with those horses we barely see her except at meals. Clayton's tone was affectionate rather than complaining. She is like her mother, passionate about her work, determined to succeed on her own terms. And Matthew is like you, Beatrice countered, steady and thoughtful and dedicated to helping others. They are good kids, Clayton said with satisfaction. We did all right by them. We did, Beatrice agreed. 2 years later, Matthew did return home, full of new knowledge and eager to set up a practice. He and Beatrice worked together beautifully, her decades of practical experience complementing his modern medical training. Slowly, Beatrice began to step back from the hardest cases, trusting her son to handle them while she focused on supporting new mothers and teaching younger women who wanted to learn midwifery. Grace married a young rancher from a neighboring spread, and soon Beatrice and Clayton were grandparents to a boisterous grandson who looked exactly like Matthew had at that age. More grandchildren followed, and the ranch that had once felt too quiet became filled with the sound of children's laughter again. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Clayton took Beatrice back to the spot where he had proposed, overlooking the canyon. They were older now, their joints creaking, their steps slower, but their love had only deepened with time. 25 years, Clayton marveled. It has gone so fast. And so slow, Beatrice added. I remember everything, every moment. The good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, all of it. Clayton pulled a small package from his pocket and handed it to her. I got you something. Beatrice unwrapped it to find a beautiful silver locket. Inside were tiny photographs, one of Matthew and one of Grace. Clayton, it is beautiful. Open the other side, he instructed. She did, and found a photograph of the two of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful and madly in love. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at those two people, barely recognizing the lines of her own face, so young and unlined. We have had a good life, Clayton said softly. Better than I ever dreamed possible, and I wanted you to have something to remember it by. I do not need a locket to remember, Beatrice said, fastening the chain around her neck. Every day with you is a memory I treasure, but this is beautiful, and I will wear it always. They stood at the canyon's edge, arms around each other, watching the sunset as they had countless times before. Beatrice thought about that young woman who had rushed across the scrubland in the dark, terrified and determined to save a life. She thought about the cowboy who had showed up to help, who had stood guard through the night, who had looked at her like she was the bravest person he had ever seen. 25 years later, they were still standing guard for each other, still marveling at what they had built together, still falling in love a little more with each passing day. Thank you, Beatrice said quietly. For what? Clayton asked. For showing up that night, for staying. For choosing me every single day since then. Clayton kissed her temple, his lips warm against her skin. I will choose you every day for the rest of my life, he promised. In this world and whatever comes after, you are my heart, Beatrice Adams. You always will be. As they walked back to their wagon, hands clasped tight, Beatrice felt a deep contentment settle over her. Life had not been easy. They had faced hardships and losses, struggles and sorrows, but they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. The years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren, more challenges, more moments of profound joy. Matthew's practice thrived, and he married a lovely schoolteacher who helped expand medical services in the territory. Grace's horse breeding operation became so successful, she had to hire additional hands to help manage it. Clayton's ranch remained prosperous, and he took great pride in knowing it would pass to his children and grandchildren after him. Beatrice eventually retired from midwifery entirely at age 60, though she continued to advise Matthew and the younger midwives he worked with. She spent her days tending her garden, playing with grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Clayton, watching the desert light change with the seasons. On a warm spring evening when Beatrice was 68 and Clayton was 71, they sat on that familiar porch, rocking in chairs that had been worn smooth by decades of use. Their hands were gnarled now, their hair completely white, but they still held hands like newlyweds. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed in St. Louis?" Clayton asked. "If you had married one of those respectable men courting you instead of coming west?" Beatrice considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I cannot imagine it really. That life seems like it belonged to someone else, someone I never really was. Coming here, becoming a midwife, meeting you, that is when my real life started." "I feel the same way," Clayton said. "Everything before that night you delivered Sarah Miller's baby, it was just marking time. Surviving, not living. You taught me the difference, Beatrice. You taught me what it means to really live." They rocked in silence, listening to the familiar sounds of evening settling over the desert. Inside the house, they could hear their daughter-in-law preparing dinner, the sound of grandchildren playing. The sounds of family, of legacy, of a life well lived. "If I could go back," Beatrice said softly, "to that young woman running across the desert in the dark, terrified she would not be able to save her patient, do you know what I would tell her?" "What?" Clayton asked. "That everything is going to be all right, better than all right. That the cowboy who shows up to help will become the love of her life. That she will have children and grandchildren, that she will save dozens of lives, that she will build something beautiful and lasting, that all the fear and uncertainty will be worth it." Clayton brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And if I could go back to that cowboy standing outside in the dark, listening to you fight so hard to save that mother and baby, I would tell him to be brave, to not let this amazing woman slip away, to fight for her the way she fights for others." "You did fight for me," Beatrice reminded him. "You fought for us, every single day." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, Beatrice Dawson Adams looked at her husband and felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt 43 years ago when he first told her he was falling in love with her. Time had weathered their faces and slowed their steps, but it had not diminished what they meant to each other. If anything, the years had only made their love deeper, richer, more precious. "I love you, Clayton Adams," she said, as she had said 1,000 times before and would say 1,000 times more. "I love you, Beatrice Adams," he replied, his gray eyes still storm-colored after all these years, still capable of making her breath catch. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together as darkness fell. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. The midwife who had delivered a baby alone in the desert, and the cowboy who had stood guard through the night, protecting something precious. Neither of them had known that night that they were also guarding the beginning of their own story, their own future, their own happily ever after. But they knew it now, and they held tight to each other as the stars emerged one by one in the vast Arizona sky, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy that had brought them to this perfect evening, still together, still in love, still standing guard over the life they had built together.